So welcome everyone to our last drop-in session for the motorcycle parking changes in Hackney. Today I just want to explain to you the agenda of the session. So we're going to start with some the presentations of all the panelists. We're going to follow that by the housekeeping rules and the function explanation. After that, we'll explain the poll questions. That will be followed by a presentation by one of our facilitators. And after that, we'll start with a discussion. So I'm going to start with myself. My name is Mariana. I am from the policy team in the Parking and Market Service, and I'll be hosting this session. Over to you, Elliot.
Hi everyone, my name's Elliot Smith. I'm a project support officer in the parking policy team, and I'll be moderating the session. In the chat, we have Eloise Grimes, Bisola Adieri, and Sarah Slade, who will be monitoring the chat.
Thank you, Elliot.
Hi everybody, my name's Michael Ben. I'm the Deputy Head of Parking at Hackney Council, and I'm really looking forward to doing my very best to answer all of your questions on our proposals today.
Hello everyone, my name's Gosika Anichibi. I'm the Policy and Programme Manager for Parking and Market Service.
Thank you. Alrighty, now we're gonna start with the housekeeping rules that Elliot will be explaining, as well as the function explanation. Over to you, Elliot.
Hi, so just a bit of housekeeping. Everyone in the, please keep it civil, and if anyone is using any offensive language, we will remove you from the conversation. If you'd like to participate today, there's a couple of ways you can do it. So if you'd like to ask a question verbally, please use the raise your hand feature. And then I will notify Mariana, who will then ask one of us will ask your question. You can also type your question in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, or if you'd like to chat more generally, there's the chat function as well. So feel free to write in that, and our moderators will reply to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elliot. We also have another function that we'll be sharing with you today. This is the poll function. There's going to be some questions that we'll be asking everyone. They're just going to be popping up on your screen. These questions are aimed for us to understand the audience that is joining us today, and as well as questions related to the proposals. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to present the proposals. Gosika will be presenting the proposals to you. Over to you, Gosika.
Thank you, Mariana. Just one moment while I share proposals.
Thank you so much. And just to remind you, everyone, the consultation, it's live until August the 10th, Monday. So if you have not had a chance to fill out the consultation, you still have a chance to fill it out, and that will be closing on Monday. All right, over to you, Gosika, with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Mariana. So today I'm going to take you through the Have Your Say changes on motorcycle parking. We're going to go through the background of the information, the consultation proposals, and how might the proposals affect the different groups. So poor air quality contributes to an estimated 10,000 premature deaths every year. Vehicle emissions are the primary source it can to tackle this source of air pollution. That includes playing its part. You know, as part of our transport strategy and parking enforcement plan, we are committed to encouraging people to travel more sustainably, which includes things like increased walking, cycling, and promoting the use of public transport over private car. So the background information to these proposals is that they are aimed to encourage motorcyclists to switch to less polluting zero emission vehicles, and that will bring Hackney in line with 7 of 11 other inner London boroughs that are already charged motorcycle parking. Historically, motorcycles have not been charged to park in the borough, largely because it's not been possible for us to do this. You know, we've not had e-permits until recently, until a few years ago. So that meant that if we were to introduce them maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there would be nowhere for a permit to display on a motorcycle securely for them to park. Developments in technology has helped with things like I said earlier, e-permits and now cashless parking, which means that we are able to do this. And we also want to provide more secure parking for motorcycle addresses to address motorcycles to address security concerns. So motorcycle riders have told us that they want more secure parking for motorcycles, and that's one of the reasons why we're proposing this as part of the consultation. So the consultation proposals themselves, it's a requirement to hold a valid permit to park in any permit holder bay, which will be charged on emissions-based charging. So that permit bay will be resident permit bay, business permit bay, permit bays. So any permit bay, they would need to have a valid permit to park in. Also making it a requirement for visitors travelling by motorcycle to display an e-voucher, which is an e-visitor voucher, or purchase a session such as a Ringo cashless parking session. As mentioned before, to install lockable stands as motorcycle bays, at motorcycle bays to increase security and also reduce thefts. I mean, people have told us that security concerns are a big issue for them. So by introducing lockable stands, we hope that we can alleviate some of this. And the final proposal is to convert free solo motorcycle bays into shared motorcycle bays. So what that would mean is that whether you have a permit, a parking permit, so a resident permit or a business permit, or you're a visitor and you're just come to see someone, you will both be able to share that space, which will be a lockable stand or solo motorcycle space to be able to park your vehicle. So how might these proposals affect you? So if you're a motorcyclist in Hackney, this will mean that you would need to purchase a parking permit or a cashless pay and display session through Ringo. And that depends on where you are parking, because in some locations we don't have Ringo. Not Ringo, so we don't have cash. So you will benefit from increased security through the expansion of lockable stands. If you're a resident, you will need a permit to park your motorcycle in Hackney, and you'll also be entitled to one permit per person. So this limit covers both vehicles and motorcycles. So if you have a car and you have a motorcycle, you would need to make a choice between the two if the proposals are to go through. If you're an estate resident, you will need a permit to park in your motorcycle on your estate. And you'll also be entitled to one permit per household. And this limit covers, again, both motorcycles and vehicles. So on estates where space is already limited, because you might have an estate that has 300 properties, but only maybe 30 parking spaces within the estate, those limits are curtailed to one permit per household. So again, they would need to have either a permit for their vehicle or for their motorcycle if these proposals are to go through. As a business, you would need a business parking permit to park your motorcycle in Hackney. Currently, our permits allow one permit can cover up to three motorcycles, and one business can have up to 5 permits. So even though it covers the 3 motorcycles, only one can be covered at any time. So it just allows the flexibility to move it. If some staff are working one day and then maybe not on the weekends, someone else can use it on that day, and so on. And if you're a visitor to the borough, you would need a valid e-voucher if you're visiting someone that lives in Hackney to park in our permit bays. Or again, if you're coming there for some business or seeing someone else who lives in Hackney and they don't have an e-voucher, you can use a pay for valid session through Ringo. Commuters and workers in the borough, they can pay to park in Hackney using pay and display bays, and they can also pay to park in solo motorcycle bays and shared use bays. But what we will be introducing is maximum stay restrictions, which will apply to prevent all-day commuter parking. And as a blue badge holder, we currently allow residents to apply for a companion badge, which will allow them to park free within their home parking zone. This is going to be extended, if approved, to motorcycles. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Kosika. So right now, before we start the discussion part of the session, I'm going to start with a poll question. So I'm just going to launch the question and I'm going to read it out loud. This is to encourage you to please answer the questions. And then the first question is, do you ride a motorcycle in Hackney? Possible answers are yes, no, a household member does. I'm just going to allow some more time for everyone to respond. And then I will end the poll. So just bear with us here and I will end the poll. So I'm just gonna share the results with you. So 2 of the participants that are joining us today responded yes, they do ride a motorcycle in Hackney. All right, so right now what we would like to do is to start the discussion. So like Elliot was explaining, we want to take questions from you. So you can either ask a question through the chat function, you can ask a question through the Q&A function, or you can raise your hand and we will allow you the opportunity to ask your question verbally. I did see Martin that he had his hand raised, so I'll unmute you, Martin, so that you can go ahead and ask a question if you would like. So Martin, you are unmuted. If you would like to ask a question, you can go ahead and ask the question. Martin, you go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Me?
Welcome. Thank you. We can hear
well,
you.
I do challenge the assertion that motorcycles are part of the pollution problem. In a recent French study, the recommendation was that for a particular, what shall we say, improvement in air quality, there should be a 50% increase in motorcycles. There should be a corresponding decrease in private cars, transit type vans and small lorries. I mean, the transit type vans, small lorries, yeah, we hope they can be reduced. Partly online deliveries are causing a rise in those, but that has nothing to do with motorcycles. Motorcycles can often be used by a workman who cannot carry, say, 30 kilos of equipment on foot or by bike or on public transport, and would likely spend maybe an hour and a half travelling on public transport, whereas you only travel about 20 minutes by bike. It's a complete disaster for anyone who has to work like that. People often need their family car as well, and you want this single use only. I mean, in my view, it's utter madness. You're really having to go at the, shall we say, the working man who gets his hands dirty, not someone who turns up in an office and just has to sit behind a computer.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Michael, would you like to comment on Martin's view, please?
Yeah, happily. Hi, Martin. Thanks very much for taking part in this session and for giving us your view. In respect of the study and I suppose your overall sense of what we're attempting to do here, I do want to make clear that we are not looking to prevent people from using motorbikes. That is not the case. We are not banning motorbikes from being used in the borough, and we recognise that they play a really important role in helping support many of our local businesses, which rely on them for undertaking deliveries, and also many residents own motorbikes as well. And we're simply looking to ensure that across all vehicle types, from the very largest and most polluting vehicles all the way down to bikes, that we are treating all vehicles which are powered by combustion engines in exactly the same way and charging accordingly. So it's about ensuring that across the piece we are looking to try and address and encourage people to think about the emissions, think about air quality, and incentivize people to make more sustainable choices while still enabling people to go about their business, whether it be for work purposes or for personal use. So it's certainly not about banning, and it's certainly not about looking to try and limit people's freedoms to use motorbikes if they so choose. On the limits, we're very keen to hear from people about how the proposals as they're currently set out affect individuals. From what you described, Martin, are you someone who has a motorbike and also another vehicle of some kind?
Yeah, I have a motorbike and I have a car. Actually, my bike is a rather ancient one, but a modern, say, Honda 125, which a lot of people would use, only has something like 45 grams of carbon. It will do pushing 150 miles to the gallon. It will take 1/3 of the time to travel to any place in the car, therefore actually cutting that emission if you can travel by a motorbike. And yet you want to discourage them, it seems. In this report from ANSES, which is the French government, environment, etc. body, so it's a proper scientific body, on its particules de l'air ambiant extérieur, and their recommendation is an increase in motorcycle use by 50%. Now, what you're doing is decreasing it. They want the air to get better. A lot of the, shall we say, pollution comes from dust from microparticles of tires and from brake discs. The motorcycles in general will develop less of that than the electric car because of their much lighter weight. Something like a 125 would generate hardly anything at all. And yet you'll get people with gigantic SUVs weighing over 2 tons, which is probably about 20 times the weight of some motorbikes. And yet my car, which weighs 1.2 tons, only and chucks out 117 carbons, takes 3 times as long to get anywhere. A motorbike, small motorbike, will be charged exactly the same. If you want to charge £5 or £10 for the motorbike, that's one thing. If you want to allow people to have a motorbike and car, that's another. You can live with that.
Yeah.
But to charge the same for a hardly polluting at all, and in some respects better than the electric car, motorcycle, is grossly unfair. And particularly in these days of COVID, when travelling, avoiding public transport is something I think that a lot of people would want to do. So, yeah, I just think not fair at all. And you shouldn't be restricting motorcycles in any way. You should be encouraging them.
Okay, thank you for that, Martin.
Thank you.
What I'd say in answer to some of the points you've raised there is that certainly in terms of our work, we're envisaging that through the proposals we have set out within this consultation, that we will see a reduction in the overall number of vehicle movements that we'll see in Hackney. In short, because we don't anticipate seeing people who may particularly be commuting into Hackney by bike for a variety of different reasons, choosing to opt to try and travel in by some other form of motorized vehicle, car or otherwise, as a result of the imposition of fees for pay and display, limits on the amount of time that people can park to prevent all-day commuting. We did a survey a couple of years back which found that we've got about 1,000 bikes, we believe, in Hackney in total, and a significant proportion of those are parking largely in the south of the borough, so in the fringes of the city, down towards Liverpool Street. And we believe that through the proposals we have got set out here that we will see those numbers reduce. We have a big problem in Hackney with air quality. As Goska already mentioned, across London, we've got about 10,000 people dying each year, with air quality being a contributing factor to those deaths. And in Hackney, we are in the bottom 3 or 4 local authorities in terms of air quality. So it's something that the leadership of the council is extremely keen to address. We announced our climate change emergency plan last year, which also shows our real commitment to address CO2 emissions as well. And it's our view that we need to look to ensure that we have a comprehensive approach to charging vehicles of all forms, including motorbikes, based on the emissions that they produce, and not to exclude any particular vehicle type, because ultimately it doesn't help us in addressing the overall problem, which is the amount of vehicle movements and the emissions that they do produce. And I do recognise that motorbikes are certainly not the main factor in the emissions we've got in the borough, far from it, but they are a contributory factor, and it's one that we need to look to treat in the same way as other vehicles based on what they emit from their tailpipe, as opposed to the size of the vehicle, or any other form of a way of trying to drive the kind of behaviour that we want to try and instill in Hackney. We've got 7 out of 10 people in Hackney don't have any sort of vehicle whatsoever, and our real drive is to try and encourage and help people as much as possible to travel by foot and by bike and by public transport. We're not looking, as I said, to ban or prevent people from using their bikes, but we're looking to try and ensure that we're certainly reducing commuting and bringing other aspects of permitting into line with the other vehicles we have in Hackney. So I hope that's helpful in answering some of those points. I can see we've got some feedback in the chat.
Yep. Thank you, Michael. So right now what we're going to do, because we do have a few questions, Martin, I'm going to mute you for now. And if you have another question, I will allow you to ask another question after we address the questions that we have. So I have George, that he has a question. After that, we do have 3 questions that have come up in the Q&A section. So I'll allow George to ask his question, and followed by that, we're going to be asking the questions that have come up in the Q&A. So George, I am going to allow you here to ask your question. And yeah, you just have to unmute yourself. Perfect. Over to you, George.
Hi, my name is George Dennison. I am probably the only motorcycle dealer in the borough that does any kind of volume of motorcycles. I run Moto Den and Scooter Den. I've been selling motorcycles in Hackney now for over 20 years. I think the boroughs, I've lived in the borough also for 35 years, and actively discouraging the use of powered 2-wheelers, which is what you're trying to do, is going down completely the wrong path when we should be encouraging it. I think trying to encourage people just to cycle and walk everywhere isn't realistic, especially for workers who can't afford or their range is too far on bicycles. And you're really missing a trick with powered 2-wheelers. Powered 2-wheelers are the solution. And before you start going on about the electric scooters or motorcycles, or what you really want to see, the quality of that product and the technology needed for that to be usable isn't ready yet. And it's really sad to see what you're doing. The amount of guys that are doing gig economy work on Deliveroo and Uber Eats, etc., that you're going to force into having to pay parking charges, I think is disgusting. Your proposals that you're talking about with permits and stuff, I don't know how my business is going to function given what you're proposing, because I'm not going to be able to park the vehicles that I need to work on now. A business that employs 30 people in the borough, how am I going to be able to, how's that going to work? I also, if you want me to be here to train the people, when I work with Hackney Council, I have 10 full-time instructors training people, to train people to ride these electric vehicles that are going to come in maybe 10 years. My business needs to survive between now and then. So I know that that's lots of things I mentioned. I really think your policy is wrong. I also think your policy is a foregone conclusion. I think doing consultations like this, you've made your mind up and you're going through the legalities of it, and that and no matter what I say or what Martin has just said, I don't think you'll pay any attention to it. And I'm just a bit disappointed with the whole thing. We should be encouraging people to use powered two-wheelers. You know, they move fast, they pollute less, and they get people to where they need to go without having, you know, cars, trucks and vans sitting in the road pumping out fuel. The more people, if everybody was on a powered two-wheeler like other European cities, the air quality would be a lot better. And I think you're focusing at the wrong thing.
All right, George, thank you so much. We'll just comment on your intervention here. Goska, would you like to say something? Michael, would you like to say something to George?
Hi, George. Thank you very much for your input, and it's really interesting to hear from, from obviously a business owner whose business is built around bikes and mopeds. And I'd be interested to hear a bit more from you in terms of how you envisage that the proposals, particularly around the business permitting side. So, as Goska explained earlier on, the limits we have in place across the borough for all businesses is of up to 5 business permits per business premise. So obviously you say you've got I think 2 or 3 locations, so it'd be 5 permits at each of those different premises you have in the borough. And we have flexibility built in to allow for different people carrying out business activities by enabling up to 3 vehicles being attached to each of those permits. So if you have different people going out to do different work across the borough on different days, there's flexibility to move the permit between those vehicles. So can I get your view in terms of how you see that impacting upon your business and what challenges or otherwise you feel that that would bring up?
Yes, that wouldn't work for me because we obviously have different vehicles coming in and out to work on every day. So having 3 attached vehicles to one permit, the permit would need to be flexible across a variety of registration numbers because your system just wouldn't work for me.
So when you say to work on, are you talking about repairs?
Yes. Yes. I mean, the new vehicles aren't a problem because the new vehicles are inside and unregistered, and when they're sold to a customer, but your permit system does not work for a business like mine. It may work for somebody with a fixed asset of vehicles that they're using on a regular basis, but that isn't how it works for us. We've got different vehicles coming every day, up to 50 vehicles a day coming in. So your system wouldn't work for us. And
you've got no space within your business premises to store those off the public highway?
Michael, we live in Hackney.
I appreciate that, and I'm very aware of just how densely packed the borough is, but I just wanted to inquire as to whether that's the case across all of your premises or not.
I also employ 30 people in the borough, and Hackney has encouraged my business from inception in the late 90s. I've had grants off the borough. I actively work with Sandra on the road safety department, training people, doing road safety stuff with people. I'm very active in the borough. I'm Hackney through and through. What you're doing isn't right.
Can I just also add, thank you for joining us, George. It's really good to get your feedback on these issues. I just wanted to say, you mentioned in your earlier comments that you felt that this was a foregone conclusion, and I just wanted to say to you that it's not. You know, we are consulting and we do take consultation very, very seriously to get the views of residents of businesses. We've extended this consultation to 6 months. It's been now nearly 6 months to ensure that we get all the feedback that we can from our residents and our businesses. And we, you know, based on that feedback, we will look at it and see what improvements we can make. So the more you're able to tell us and the more feedback you're able to give in the consultation document, if you've gone online and you filled it out, that's going to help us to work out what's going to be the best proposal, if any, that we're going to put forward.
Thank you very much, Gossika, Michael, and George. So right now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to move to the Q&A. questions that we have lined up. George, if you would like to ask another question later on, I'll just raise your hand again and I will just let you speak again. For now, I'm just going to move to the Q&A. So over to you, Elliot.
Yeah, so Tessa has asked, can you explain how adding charges for motorcycle parking would help with low emission zone? They are already low emission vehicles and take up minimal space to park. Gosika, would you like to answer this question? Goss, I think you're on mute at the moment.
Sorry about that. I was just saying, thank you very much, Tess, for your question. In terms of what you were saying, in terms of the additional charging, I think it's just about discouraging people to get on their motorbikes and ride into Hackney and use it for commuting purposes. Obviously, what we're looking at is trying to discourage people from using motorbikes, using vehicles, and we're looking at it holistically. I understand that, you know, compared to a car, a motorbike has less emissions, and I do take that point on board. But we're trying to discourage the use of motorcycles for commuting purposes. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Gosika. Elliot, I think.
Sorry, Mariana, I just wanted to add as well that I'm reviewing the question here and seeing in terms of the space that a motorcycle takes. Obviously, we're not looking at it from a space perspective, we're also looking at the emissions that it emits. So that's why the pricing is where it is. We're looking at how much emissions any vehicle gives at any one time. So it's not looking at the space at all. Sorry about that. I just thought I'd add that.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Gosika. Elliot, would you like to go ahead with the next question, please?
Yeah, so Tessa asks makes another comment about saying it makes no sense to treat all vehicles in the same way. It seems to me to be excessively punitive to motorbike users. Michael, would you like to answer that comment, please?
I mean, just to, I'd say we're not looking to try and treat motorcyclists and motorcycle riders in the same way as vehicles. What we're trying to do is actually ensure that, irrespective of whether you're driving a 5.5 meter transit van all the way down to the smallest moped or electric G-Wiz vehicle, that no matter how many wheels your vehicle has got or the size that it takes up on the road, that we are charging based on the emissions that that vehicle produces. So that is, in effect, the cornerstone that underpins the proposals around the charging. We've never within Hackney taken into consideration the size of a vehicle in terms of how much space it takes up on the pavement, and emissions-based charging, and before that, engine size-based charging has always tried to ensure that our charging is based on the contribution that each and every vehicle makes towards emissions within Hackney, and the approach that we are proposing with motorcycles is entirely consistent with that. And I think from the work that we've done so far, it's clear that the vast majority of bikes will fall into our second lowest band. So the lowest band are the electric pricing. The next band is, I think, for residents, £61 a year. So that's where most motorbikes will fall into, and rightly so, because they do emit less than larger, more polluting and diesel vehicles. So they will still fall at the lower end of the pricing within our pricing structure across all our permit types, which is commensurate with the emissions they produce and the impact they have on our local environment.
Thank you so much, Michael. I do think we have a couple more questions. Elliot, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So got a question from an anonymous viewer. It says, my issue is that I've lived for 10 years in a block and used my motorbike for work every day. And in my block, we cannot get a residence permit unless disabled. How is this fair? Gosika, would you like to answer this question for us, please? Gosika, I think you're on mute again.
Sorry, I do apologise. Thank you very much for the question. The only reason why you would not get a permit in Hackney is if you live in a car-free development or Section 106, which means that at the time of either signing your tenancy agreement or buying your house, you would have been notified at that point that you were not allowed to own any sort of motor vehicle. And if you have lived in an area where it's uncontrolled, during that time, you might have been able to buy a vehicle because it doesn't need to have any permits if it's uncontrolled. And as it's moving into the controlled parking zone, or if this proposal does go through, then it would mean that you would need to basically buy a permit. So if you're living in Section 106 or a car-free development, then you will not be able to buy a permit. And that is as part of the deeds and the tenancy agreement that you have signed up to, and there's not really much more that we can do with regards to that, because you would have been informed at the time of moving in to that property that that was the case. You know, visitor vouchers are available, but they are not supposed to be used to park vehicles of any sort. They're there to assist you in visitors coming to do repairs and coming to your property for those reasons. So that would be the reason why. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gosika.
I'd just add to that there are other off-street parking options which are available. There are a number of garages which are available for rent across Hackney, and other off-street parking locations that you can find via a variety of websites. So it doesn't necessarily mean the end to being able to have your vehicle or have your motorbike. It's just a case that it won't be able to continue to be parked on street.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So before we continue, just to understand a little bit more the audience that is joining us today, I'm just going to go ahead with another poll question. I'm just going to read it out loud, and this question again is going to pop up on your screens. And the question is, are you a resident, business, visitor, person who works in the area, or other? This just will allow us to understand a little bit better the audience that is joining us today in this session. Just going to allow a couple more seconds, and just so you know, in the chat we have the permit price list that was introduced with the proposal. So if you want to look at it, it's in the chat. So I'm just going to end the poll. And I'll share the results. And from the people that responded to this question, the three participants have answered that there are actually Hackney residents. All right, so we're going to go ahead now and continue on. We have 2 more questions in the Q&A section. So I'll pass it over to you, Elliot.
Thank you, and please remember, if you'd like to raise your hand, you can ask a question verbally as well. So got another follow-up from Tessa saying, you're aware that this makes no sense since the parking charges via Ringo are the same as for cars, as are the penalty fines. Michael, would you like to come back on this question, please?
Yes, again, it sort of links back to what I said earlier on about, so for permit prices, obviously our pricing is based on emissions, and we don't make any allowances or take into account the size of vehicles in terms of how those charges are levied. Exactly the same applies for pay and display parking, whereby we have a set fee at present across the borough, which varies from area to area depending on the amount of demand that there is for parking in those areas, but which again is not linked to the vehicle's size. So for the same reasons, we have proposed that, again, we're looking to apply the same charging across all vehicle types, irrespective of their size, and that's why the proposal set out at the moment include motorcycles being levied the same fee as all other vehicles that choose to park for a cashless parking session.
Thank you so much, Michael. There is another question that has come up through the Q&A, and we're going to answer a couple more questions, and then I'm just going to allow Jason, that is raising his hand, to also ask a question verbally. So if you want to go ahead, Elliot, and ask the last question, we'll go to Jason, and then we'll go back to the Q&A section.
Sure. So it's just a follow up to the question about the car-free developments from Alex. Yes, but the only permit I can buy is a visitor voucher at £25 a week. My contract states only a car that he was not allowed. Goska, would you like to come back on this question?
Thanks, Elliot. Yes, I would. So in terms of the agreement, they're normally section 106, which means you can't have any sort of car or motor vehicle attached to your home address. I can't comment on your specific contract without having looked at it and see what it actually entails. But in general, that's what that means. Visitor vouchers are there, but they are priced at a point where you are not supposed to use them to park your vehicle every single day. You're supposed to use them to park your vehicle, park your guests' vehicle that are there for short stays. So whether it be 2 hours or 1 day, come to visit you. So they're not designed for residents to park on a daily basis their car or a second car. They're not there for that purpose. And that's why, in terms of an expense, if you used to go down that route, it would be quite costly. I know Michael had mentioned to you there are other ways in which you could find a way to park your motorcycle.
Thank you so much, Goska. So we're moving on here to Jason. Jason has raised his hand. So Jason, I'm gonna allow you to ask your question verbally. So it's over to you. Just have to unmute yourself. Perfect. Go ahead, please.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. I've always been slightly confused as to how you're going to measure the efficacy of the policy in the first place, bearing in mind what the stated intention is. So it appears a way of raising revenue for the council, and if you'd gone ahead and said that, that would kind of be okay. But in terms of trying to encourage people onto different forms of transport, unless I'm wrong, you don't know how many bikes of what kind there are in Hackney. You don't know what bikes come into Hackney nor what kind they are. How are you going to measure the success of the scheme if the avowed intention is to encourage people onto different modes of transport, notwithstanding the fact that I've heard on other sessions such as this that there is obviously some discussion in times of COVID as to whether that's a good idea in the first place. But just staying with the central premise, you're going to encourage people onto different forms of transport. How are you going to measure it? And by any chance, if the measure isn't successful, were you to be able to measure it, will you reverse it? So first question, how are you going to measure it? Second question, if it isn't successful, will you reverse it? Obviously, I know the answer, but hey.
Lovely. Jason, thank you so much for your question. Michael, would you like to go ahead and answer?
Happily, Jason, thanks very much for your question. In terms of the measurement, as I mentioned earlier on, we did a survey a couple of years back and found that in the region of 1,000 motorbikes are parking in Hackney each day, with a significant portion down in the south of the borough. So we have a sort of an initial yardstick of the number of motorbikes that we have parking in the borough on any given day. Once, if these proposals are adopted, then we will obviously over the first few months begin to get a better understanding of the number of vehicles and in fact be able to set a baseline as people obviously will need to apply for permits if they wish to park their bikes on street, likewise for businesses, and also for pay and display sessions we'll be able to identify which of those are bought by most bikes. So we'll be able to understand what level of most bike usage there is in Hackney, much better than we are at the moment, where, to be completely honest, because we don't have permits attached to motorbikes at present, we're only able to get a generalised view of the current position. And then obviously over time, we'll be able to then see how that demand and usage changes over time, as we do at present for the permits and pay and display sessions that we have across all the other vehicle types parking in Hackney.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, yeah, I get how you're going to baseline it.
Yeah.
But then presumably once you've baselined it, you're going to measure the success of the policy and the diminution of bike usage.
Absolutely. So we have in-depth business intelligence reporting that we've got set up to measure the overall levels of usage across all the various different forms of parking that we have in the borough. So that will help us to get a very early indication of the first couple of years of these proposals, if they do go forward, to understand the impact they're having from when they're initially introduced to that point. And across this area, as well as other areas within parking policy, we're always keeping how we're operating under review. And if things are not delivering the results that we're looking for, then we are always looking to come back and see how we can do things differently.
So can I just play that back for understanding, because I'm a bit thick sometimes. So you want less people to own and use bikes. And so starting from a base where you just don't know how many of us there are, you're going to collect that data, work out how many of us there are at that point, and that many there are is the people who register. And of course, it won't count the people who are coming into the borough. And then you're going to monitor the usage of motorbikes over a period of time and decide whether there has been a diminution or not in it, notwithstanding the fact, well, lots of other facts. So that's what you're going to do. Yes?
So we, as I said at the beginning of my answer, we already have a good handle on the number of bikes that are currently parking within Hackney on any given day.
Fair play. Fair play. And just the other thing, and I really apologise because I came late on the call. I'll keep the question really short. If I understand correctly, the ULEZ zone will extend to our area at the end of next year, all things, all things being equal. That is the intention.
Yes.
So that every time you ride a non-ULEZ compliant vehicle of any description, which is, I believe for diesel, anything made after, before 2015, anything petrol, before 2003, that will cost the user £15 a trip. Yes? That's what they're saying at the moment. I know it's not you, that's what the ULEZ...
No, that's fine. In terms of specific details, I don't have those to hand, but yes, the ULEZ zone is due to be extended to the North and South Circulars in autumn next year, and obviously for vehicles that fall short of the requirements, then yes, a fee will be levied in order to discourage those vehicles from driving within inner and central London.
Absolutely, including our area, of course. So the question that you can see coming a mile off is, why tax us again for owning the vehicle when every time we ride the vehicle, if we're non-compliant, we're going to have to pay £15 a pop? It just seems like double bubble. It's just the bubble's going to someone different. It's not going to TfL, it's going to you.
In short, because they are aiming at slightly different things. So for the ULEZ, the ultra low emission zone, for those who aren't familiar with the term, it's aimed at really trying to get the most polluting vehicles driving around London to steer clear of central London at present, but obviously that's going to extend beyond that from next autumn. And it applies a simple yes/no criteria to that, whereby if you are emitting above that level, then you're levied the fee. And if you are below that level, which is, in our view, set at quite a high bar at present. I mean, you mentioned obviously with the petrol vehicles, it goes back as far as the early 2000s. Our position as a council, which is in common with many other local authorities, is that we are not simply looking to try and reduce emissions from the most polluting vehicles. We are looking to try and ensure that across the piece, we are incentivizing people to think carefully about the emissions of their vehicles, their bikes, anytime they choose to make a decision about whether they want to keep a vehicle, buy a vehicle, or change a vehicle, and to incentivize people to opt for the greenest possible method of transport that fits with them and how they want to live their lives and how they work and a whole range of other different parameters. So that's why we feel that our proposals are complementary to those of the ULEZ, and that it's not simply for the ULEZ to do the heavy lifting, as it were, on trying to address air quality across London and the UK more widely.
Okay, and my very last question, but I hope these are interesting for everybody, but if they're not, just shut me up. it's a little bit like lockdown. The instrument you're using is quite blunt because, as other callers and in previous sessions have pointed out, the level of pollution delivered by two wheels is, I know it's arguable depending how you want to measure it, but in most normal ways of measuring it, is less than a car, yet you're using the same instrument to do that. By measuring emissions, are you not disproportionately affecting the less well off? Because frankly, I'm middle class, I'll be able to pay it. It's not financially going to be a problem, but it is clearly going to be a problem for lots of people who rely on their two wheels as a primary mode of transport, as a means of getting to and from work, and in many cases being part of, for the rightly or wrongly, the gig economy, which is something that is giving people employment. Whether we think that's a good thing or not is a different matter. Sorry, long-winded, I sounded like I'm a politician. All I'm asking is, are you not disproportionately having an effect on those that are less well off, which I know wouldn't be your primary intention, but that does appear to be a key unforeseen policy outcome of what you're doing, or not?
I think it's certainly an interesting points that you've raised, and as part of any policies that we look to take forward, we are legally and rightfully obliged to carry out what's called an equalities impact assessment to understand and look at the impact of proposals on different groups within the local community. And some of the points that you've raised there are very much ones that we're alive to, and we will be taking on board when looking at the fine details of how, particularly based on the feedback we get from the consultation. And it's fantastic we've had so much feedback from people. I think we're now over 4,000 responses, which is absolutely brilliant, and will really help us to understand where the proposals maybe fundamentally sound, but equally where we need to go back and actually look more closely and again at the impact that some of these proposals may have, and look at how we can try and be more targeted and how we're trying to improve air quality whilst minimizing the impact on certain user groups. So these are all things we're going to be looking at as we do the assessment of the consultation feedback, and I really welcome you raising those as concerns.
Okay, and I heard George make the point earlier, but it does feel a little bit like a done deal, in as much as, I mean, consultations are not binding by definition, like referenda. I believe you had quite a big response to your waste management consultation, which was, please don't introduce the measures you want to introduce. From memory, 49 to 30 odd, and you went ahead and introduced them anyway. What's the set? Well, why is this going to be any different? Because we definitely get the feeling, us poor little motorbike riders, that you're going to do it anyway. What might change your mind? What might make you make changes?
In short, it's listening to the views of people, both motorbike riders and other people who've given us their views through the consultation process. You're right in saying that a consultation is not a referendum on the proposals and whether the public are in favour of them or not. What it does do is help to give, to really shine a light on what we've set out as a council, and to help us understand, as I've just mentioned, where there are real practical challenges around what we've set out. And I hope that in terms of the approach we're taking to this consultation, the way we're trying to be really open up a dialogue with yourself, everyone else who's on this call and the other calls we've done over the last few months, demonstrates just how seriously we are listening to how everyone feels about what we've set out, to try and really understand the impacts, both positive and otherwise, of what we have explained within our plans, and to take that on board in a really conscientious way.
Thank you so much, Michael, Jason. Right now I'm going to mute you. I'm going to allow other questions to be asked.
Thank you for that, by the way.
And you're very welcome. If you have another question, please raise your hand and I'll allow you to ask again. So right now we just want to go through some Q&A questions we have in the Q&A section, and then I will allow Martin to ask a question, as I know his hand has been raised for a little bit. So let's just go through these questions first, and then I will allow Martin to speak. So over to you, Elliot.
Hiya. Alex, your questions have been answered live already, and there's some more information in the chat if you'd like to look in there that Basola has put up about where you can park if you are in a controlled parking zone, or some alternatives. There's an extra question here from Tessa again. I live, work and travel as an NHS worker in Hackney. Will I be charged for when I visit patients in Hackney during the day, or does a permit cover the whole borough of Hackney? And I will ask I'll ask Michael to answer that question, please.
Thanks, Elliot. The answer to the questions is that for your resident permit, which is what you'd need to hold for your bike in order to park it outside of your home, that will only entitle you to park in your home zone, so a relatively small geographical area around where you live. That being said, we have a range of different permits for different uses across the borough, and we have what's called a health and social care permit, which we issue to health providers working through the Hackney and City Trust, so that people who are carrying out work in the community, so the likes of community midwives and others who are primarily based undertaking visits to patients in the community, are able to do so. And we have a permit that we issue. We've got, I think, about 250 of them across the borough at present, in order to facilitate that really, really important work that helps ensure that residents of the borough are getting a first-class service, and to facilitate those staff who are going about delivering those visits. So I hope that answers that question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michael. And we have Martin. I'm going to allow you to ask your question verbally. So I am unmuting you right now. I think you just need to unmute yourself, and please go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Michael has stated a number of times that motorcycles cause a lot of pollution, and yet I still don't feel as though he's answered the question as to why the French government have decided that more motorcycles would reduce pollution. I mean, it's completely insane. You're going the wrong way about it. You're going to increase congestion. You're going to increase pollution by that method. Walk, cycle, public transport just does not work in so many occasions. And also, being sort of an older persuasion, shall we say, I'm not anxious to get on a bus. I'm certainly not anxious to get on a tube. And it looks like that's what I'm going to be forced to do. You're going to be putting my life at risk, other people's, just because we may not be able to ride our motorcycles anymore.
Just to help give a bit of context, if possible, Martin, can you, if you're happy to, explain obviously how you use your bike? Are you living in Hackney and travelling to other parts of London, or how are you currently using your bike?
Well, I might go over to visit friends on it. I might go to the shops. It's not subject to the ULEZ, as it's over 4 years old. So I could recommend that to other people. Get some transport over 40 years old. You can go down to the shops and pick up a few things. Otherwise, I have to drive there in a car. Perhaps if I had a modern bike, I'd be able to use that instead. But, you know, that would then use far less petrol than my car. I mean, my bike in town will do 70 miles to the gallon. The car will do 30. Everything will take longer. It's sitting there in traffic with the engine running, whereas the motorcycle is nearly as flexible through traffic as a push bike. Doesn't cause any congestion, and therefore actually helps to reduce pollution. So yeah, it's general use of a motorbike. You go places, you do things, you see people.
Okay. Well, I mean, firstly, in terms of the French study, obviously, I'm not familiar with that particular piece of work and the background in terms of where that city stands in terms of its transport policy and the challenges that it's got. But we're very clear within Hackney and London more widely that
Well,
we.
it's Ile-de-France in Paris.
Okay. Thank you. We're very clear that there are a number of objectives we want to try and deliver here, and one of the most significant ones is obviously a major reduction in the amount of commuting into Hackney by any form of vehicular traffic, and we've obviously made significant strides in terms of reducing the number of people that have been driving to work, obviously pre-COVID. Through the COVID period, Hackney Council's worked really hard to try and support people who are supporting our community in terms of key workers to travel in to the borough and to undertake their duties to avoid public transport to keep Hackney as a whole safe. But once we move beyond COVID, we're very clear that we don't want this to be a car-led recovery. And as I said,
well, it wouldn't be a car-led recovery if you just let motorcycles alone.
Well, quite. But our judgment is that we have a significant proportion of people that are commuting from well outside of Hackney and probably beyond the M25 who are travelling in, parking within the south of the borough to travel to work, because obviously it makes it the quickest way to get to and from their place of work. But they are producing emissions every time they're driving through the borough, and our judgment, which we will be judged by over time, is that by introducing these proposals, we will see the number of people commuting by vehicles of any form reducing, which is going to help us to play a small but important part.
Well, yeah, perhaps
emissions
you're going to reduce the number of commuters coming in, but are you going to put people out of work by that? Can't come in, have to use public transport, it's not convenient, doesn't run at the right time. You might want to come in at 3 o'clock in the morning. Where's that get you if you can't come in on a motorbike or car?
Ultimately, this is why the consultation is so important, because it helps us to understand some of the potential challenges which some people may bring up along the lines of what you're describing there. But obviously, there's a wider piece around all of this, which is how is the world of work going to change over the next few years with the prevalence of working from home. But we're clear that this is something that we feel as a council is important to address, and which we don't.
I do think that you're going against the science.
Okay, well, I'm afraid I have to politely disagree with you on that, but I'm grateful for
Well, you're disagreeing with the entire French government as well.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Martin, for your question. And Michael, thank you so much for answering Martin's questions. Martin, right now I'm going to mute you. I'm going to go back to a couple more questions I have here in the chat room. I'm going to go ahead to you, Elliot, please. We have a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, and then I also have Jason that has raised his hand. After the Q&A questions that Elliot will be asking, I'm going to go ahead and ask another poll question, and then we'll move to Jason. Over to you, Elliot.
So Jason's got his hand raised as well. Would you like to ask it verbally?
I guess so, Jason. If you would like, I just unmute you, and you can go ahead and ask the question that you had typed on the Q&A section. Then, so you just need to unmute yourself right now.
Okay. Apologies for the similarity to the previous question, but I don't think it was fully answered. But we've skirted around it. So, of the totality of pollution that is measurable, one would have to imagine that the proportion of pollution delivered by motorcycles compared to cars, vans, lorries, and other vehicular transport is significantly smaller, just because of the ownership of those vehicles with regard to the others. And whilst I understand and have listened and accepted that how you're taking your baseline, accepting your baseline is going to be, I believe you said it was about 1,000. I'm not being picky about the number, whether it's 2,000, whatever it is. It is going to be, what do you think percentage of the totality of the polluting vehicles coming through and, shall we say, residing in the borough? It's going to be incredibly small. Do you have any idea how small?
It's going to be pretty small. So we don't have a specific breakdown within Hackney. We've got a lot of data and a growing quantity of data around the local emissions levels along outside our schools, where we've got a big air quality measuring network in place now on our major trunk routes. But we don't have any detail to break that down into individual vehicle types and the percentage contribution that each and every single one of those makes. So, in terms of the number of bikes that we have in the borough versus the number of cars that we have in the borough, and
vans and
sorry,
lorries and
vans and lorries, absolutely.
And lorries.
So we currently have around 31,000 permits issued across the whole of Hackney. So, if you do some fairly rudimentary maths on that, the impact of bikes is going to be, in the region of, in single digit figures, and probably at the lower end of that as well. But, and I certainly accept that it is a small proportion of the overall emissions produced in Hackney. That said, we feel that the impact of air quality on people's lives, on the contributory factor it makes towards premature deaths in Hackney, and the council's very clear commitment to reducing CO2 emissions means that we can't simply ignore one particular vehicle type, owing to the fact that it makes up a relatively small proportion of the overall emissions across the board, and that as a council we need to be working across the piece to ensure that we are incentivising people to move to greener forms of transport, no matter what the scale of those individual types of vehicles actually are.
Okay, but so you accept that you are penalising, using the same instrument, the vast minority of polluters, and I use the term advisedly, without perhaps addressing the greater issue, which would be the mass of cars, vans, lorries that are all part of daily life.
I would argue slightly differently that what we're trying to do here is ensure that we are applying the same yardstick to all motorised vehicles, irrespective of their size, and base it purely on the emissions across the board. So we are treating all vehicles in a very fair and equitable way, and not actually, if you flip it the other way, potentially favouring motorbikes over other forms of transport, so that we've got a consistent approach across the board that tries to incentivise all vehicle owners who've got tailpipe emissions to consider opting or moving towards the greenest possible vehicle that fits with their personal circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you so much, Jason. Right now, Jason, if you want to ask a question again, I'll allow you to ask later on, but I want to just go back to the Q&A section as we have a question that I wanted to address. So over to you, Elliot.
Thank you, Mariana. So to ask, why don't you charge people commuting into Hackney if you're concerned that this is the main issue, and not charge residents living in the area? Goska, would you like to comment on that question?
Thank you, Elliot. Yes, I will. Thank you, Tessa, for your question. This is why we're doing this consultation, and we're trying to get the feedback from the residents, businesses and visitors to the borough to see what proposals we should put forward for Cabinet to approve or disapprove. So that's a really good suggestion, and we'll probably consider it as part of the feedback. I can't really comment on whether or not it's something that we would take forward, but it's definitely something that we would consider, so thank you.
I mean, what I'd also just like to add on that is that we have very specifically not proposed charging for commuters, but enabling all-day parking. which would quite clearly be seen as just a way to raise revenue rather than actually trying to prevent the thing which we're trying to help reduce, which is the amount of commuting into the borough. And that's why the proposals set out at the moment make very clear that we do not envisage or propose to allow all-day parking. So most of our parking bays, with the exception of a very tiny number of historical ones, only allow typically up to about 4 hours parking, with a no return period of 4 hours afterwards, so that people can't park their vehicle and just in fact meter feed to enable themselves to park and then commute to work. And we're proposing to apply the same approach for motorbikes as well on the solar motorcycle bays in the borough, in order to ensure that commuting is not something that we are facilitating.
Lovely, Michael, thank you so much for this. Right now, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead with another poll question. It's the same, it will pop up on your screen. And this again is to understand a little bit more the audience that is joining us today. So I'm going to launch the question now. And the question is, how many vehicles do you have in your household? This is including motorcycles. So I'm just going to allow some time for people to answer this question. And I'm just going to end the poll in a couple more seconds. Alrighty, so I'm ending the poll right now, and I'm going to share the results with you. We have one person that owns one vehicle, one person that owns 2 vehicles, and then we have 2 participants that own more than 2 vehicles. Alrighty, perfect. So right now I have another, it's a question that has come up in the chat, and we transferred it here to the Q&A section. So the question, I think, was asked by Tessa, and it is: charging for parking in your own area will not affect the air quality. This argument doesn't make sense. That's sort of a comment that Tessa is making. And Kosika, would you like to comment on this?
Yes, thanks, Mariana. Yeah, I appreciate what Tessa's feedback that she's given. From our perspective, you know, it is important for us to look at the scheme holistically. So look at residents, look at businesses and visitors, and that's why we're making those proposals as one. I don't know if you want to add to that, Michael.
Yeah, just to say that the measures are proposed as a package as a whole. So when it comes to permit pricing, we're trying to strike a balance that ensures that our parking permits are not unaffordable by any means, but are incentivizing people to consider opting for greener vehicles when they choose to make a decision to purchase or lease a new vehicle. And we have seen over the last 5 years a continual improvement in the efficiency of and a reduction in the CO2 emissions from vehicles that we've got within Hackney, that in part is being driven obviously by technological improvements in vehicle engine design, but equally it's been driven by the decisions that people are making when they're going to the forecourt to make their choice about what they next wish to have. So that is playing a small but important role in helping people to make decisions. Likewise, the pay and display parking charges proposal is about making sure that people are thinking carefully about whether they really need to travel by car or by bike, particularly for short journeys, which we know through a range of different science make up a significant proportion of vehicle movements within Hackney and much of the rest of the country, and which we want people to consider trying to make by bike or by foot wherever possible. And obviously the proposals around the commuting we've discussed already. So as a whole, it's using the policy instruments we have available as a council to try and achieve a wider aim, which is a reduction in emissions, improvements in air quality, which ultimately is for the betterment of the living conditions that we have within Hackney for society as a whole. And so I go back to the previous point that, you know, we still have 7 in 10 people in Hackney that don't have a vehicle at all. It's the lowest, it's the highest proportion of non-vehicle owning households anywhere in London, and we've got the highest levels of cycling of any local authority, I believe, in the UK. So we've got a very clear and ambitious agenda to try and support and grow those areas of transport, and to encourage everyone to come on that journey with us.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for answering. So I do have 2 more people that have raised their hands. But before I go to them, I just quickly want to go ahead with the last poll question I have. So I'm just going to launch the question. And the question is, how has your motorcycle been stolen or damaged? The possible answers are yes, no, or a household member's motorcycle has. Just gonna leave a couple more seconds to this, and I will be ending the poll now. And I'll just share with everyone the results. So 1 participant has answered yes, and then 3 participants have answered no. Perfect. So I'm just going to go back to the verbal questions. Jason, I'm going to allow you to ask your question right now. So you just need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. By the way, am I on camera or not? Just didn't know.
No, you're not.
Excellent. Because saved you the awful sight that you would have. I was the one that answered that my motorcycle had been stolen. This isn't the question I wanted to ask, but it was something I noticed in one of the other sessions where you had said you had asked motorcyclists whether they wanted more security, and a unnamed number of motorcyclists had said yes around the stands. I have to say, from the motorcycling community that I know, I'm not entirely sure honestly what the efficacy or purpose would be to install more security on a motorcycle stand. Happy to be corrected by anyone else on the call, but I think it's a waste of your money, or our money, since it's our money. The question I wanted to ask was should we say, the anomalies between the policy you're pursuing and your existing residence parking policy. I live on Stoke Newington Common, and again, you consulted about this, and this is about resident parking permit times. But the vast majority of people who park on Stoke Newington Common, as you so rightly said, Michael, quite a lot of people don't own cars. It's people driving into the borough for work, and I understand that they want to do that. And then parking, because we've got 2 hours residence parking, and then you can park there all day, no problem. I just think it's nuts, in the context of everything you're proposing here, to have anomalies around residence parking. If you're going to have residence parking and we're paying for it, it would be nice if you had parking all day for residents. I know there are some people, and you have issues with people threatening to take you to court for extending those hours, but a bit of consistency would be great. I'd love to hear your views on that. So basically, we only have 2 hours of residence parking in the morning. I believe it's from 7 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock. It's completely empty, and then afterwards everyone comes in and parks, which goes exactly against what you're trying to say, to move people onto different forms of transport. It just seems crazy that you don't have a bit of a holistic view across the parking piece to address that. Sorry, that was more of a statement than a question. I apologize.
Right, that's not a problem, Jason. You don't need to apologize. Thank you for that comment or that statement. And Michael, I see.
Can I just come on that to just say that, you know, as a, I'd say as a council, we recognise that, I suppose our sense is that the zones that work most effectively are those that do cover a longer set of hours and provide the security for local residents to really prevent people from commuting and parking for shorter periods of time, which for our shorter duration zones can enable them to park all day long. Ultimately, obviously, with our consultations around our parking zones, we've obviously got some very strong views from parts of the community about exactly what they want to see for their local area. So we do have some variation within Hackney. The vast majority of zones are typically 8:30 till 6:30 Monday to Friday, with Saturday coverage in some of the areas where we've got a greater proportion of businesses, and nighttime economy also means we have longer hours in the south of the borough. But we do obviously have a couple of zones, obviously yours being one of them, and also Zone P over in the far near Victoria Park, that have shorter hours, because we are trying to listen to the needs and the views of local residents. It does obviously come with the challenges around increased scope for commuter parking, and it's something that we are very much conscious of, and we typically try and ensure that we've got parking limitations in place for the hours that we are controlling. So as I said earlier on, we don't enable people to simply, if it's a 2-hour zone, to pay for 2 hours and in effect get all day parking as a result. But ultimately, we are very much a listening council, and we need to take on board the views of residents in each and every zone, which have got very different makeups and requirements and views on these things. And that's why we've got a slightly mixed economy. But I recognise that it does have an impact on commuter parking as a whole, and it's something that obviously is a challenge and one we need to continue to address.
And last question, I promise I won't speak again. When you bring this in, so I can park in my front garden, but I will want to park elsewhere in the borough. You're not setting up loads of motorcycle bays, are you? We can just park as we do now, but we're just going to have to pay. That's how it's going to work, right? Or not? Sorry, the question is, will we have to park in a motorcycle bay, or can we park anywhere but still pay using Ringo or whatever device you want us to use?
Thank you so much. Jason Goska, would you like to go ahead and answer Jason's question, please?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much, Mariana, and thank you for your question, Jason. So the proposals are stating that you could be able to park in pay and display bays and shared use spaces across the borough to pay if you want to go there and park. And also there'll be the added option of solar motorcycle bays, which are we're proposing to be shared as well. So it will be an option between solar motorcycles and shared use bays, which are used by cars and motorcycles at the moment, and also pay display bays, all three. While I've still got you, I just wanted to address what you said about the motorcycle bays and whether or not the secure motorcycle bays will be useful. I mean, one of the things that we're looking to do is work closely with the police to try and bring in secure locations for motorcycle bays where they will be in natural surveillance, so not in areas where they're hidden by street furniture, such as a bus stop or a telephone box or anything like that. So try and think of really good locations where it might even be not covered by CCTV, where it might be covered by CCTV. So if someone were to steal or attempt to steal a motorcycle, hopefully we'll be able to have some sort of evidence for that crime. So, and if we do go ahead and if these proposals are accepted at Cabinet, then we will know what motorcycles are abandoned, because there must be a lot of them in the borough that are abandoned at the moment, which also encourages people to do crime. If they're just motorcycles trying to get the parts and whatever else. So we will know which ones are abandoned and be able to remove those from the street. So these are the things that we would think about working alongside the police to ensure that motorcycles in the borough are kept as safe as possible.
Thank you so much, Goska. Thank you so much, Jason. And just so, to let everyone know, it's 5:24, so we just have some time left. And I'm very conscious that I have 2 people raising their hands, so I just want to let you know that I don't want to cut the session abruptly, but we're getting to the end of the session. I wanted to remind you, everyone, to please fill out the consultation if you have not. We'll put the link to the consultation on the chat. And also we created a very short survey for you to please rate the session in terms not of the proposals, but how you have liked being able to have these discussions with the senior members of the parking department. And I'm just quickly gonna go to Martin and then to George, and then I think after that we'll probably have to wrap up. So Martin, I am just going to allow you to ask your question verbally. You just have to unmute yourself.
Hello. They were talking about the number of motorcycles in the borough and that you'll know this by the number of parking permits issued. But I think that a lot of motorcyclists will be parking their bikes in their front garden, so won't require a permit of any sort. So therefore, you'll have no idea of how many bikes there are in the borough. It'll just be a rough estimate. Secondly, as security measures, it's often recommended that a motorcycle is covered and that the cover is locked in place. Now, if that motorcycle is on the road, how will your wardens or whoever know whether that motorcycle has a permit?
Thank you so much, Martin. Gosika, would you like to answer Martin's question, please?
Hi, Martin. Thank you very much for your question. So, yeah, in terms of the lockable, the bays, if people were to secure their motorbikes with a cover, then our CEOs would need to remove that, or remove it up until the license plate to see if it has got a
Yeah,
permit.
but some covers lock around the wheels and you can't actually move them. It's all part of the security system.
I understand that. So it would be down to the resident or the user of the bike to ensure that their VRM is visible to stop any sort of enforcement. So it would be down to that person to ensure
What
that.
would they remove the motorcycle on a trolley or something?
I mean, without a specific example, I can't really say, but you know, that could be something as a likely outcome. It's no different.
Even though it has a parking permit.
So it's no different to what we would do for a car. If a car had a cover and it was parked on the road, which some cars do, we would do the same process of getting a CO and they put on their body worn cameras to show that there wasn't going to be any sort of damage to the vehicle as they would remove the cover. So in that instance, it would just be the same process. If it was locked down in place and it wasn't visible, like I said, it is down to the user or the motorcyclist, resident, whoever owns that bike, to ensure that their vehicle has got a permit and that permit is visible.
Thank you.
It's visible in respect of the license plate being shown.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gosika. Thank you so much, Martin. I apologize, but I'm going to allow George to ask a question because his hand was, it's been raised for a little bit, and I just want to make sure we get his question again. If I have a little bit more of time after his intervention, I will go back to you if you would like to ask another question, Martin. Thank you so much. All right, and George, I'm going to allow you to ask your question verbally, and before you go ahead, we are running a little bit short in time, so just want to let you know, but please go ahead, George. I have unmuted you, so I think it's you unmuted yourself, so please go ahead.
Yes, this question is really aimed at Gosika and her comment about placing motorcycle parking in highly visible areas with where cameras would be able to spot any thefts and create evidence. I'm just not sure, Gosika, if you're aware that most motorcycle thieves wear motorcycle clothing, and it doesn't matter how many cameras you put near them, the evidence is useless because you can't identify motorcycle thieves' faces. So I think going down that route is probably wasting your time, and probably better you just leave that one alone. Like I say, I've been doing this a long time. Motorcycle theft rates are massively down in the past couple of years as well. I don't think worrying about motorcycle thefts as a way of introducing the policy that you want to introduce is the way to go. That has naturally been taken care of by the police. Motorcyclists taking better care of locking up their bikes properly, which they're now doing. But aiming motorcycle parking where there's cameras isn't going to help you. So I'd suggest you don't waste your time.
Can I ask a question of you, George, if that's okay? It's Michael here, about the security measures that we have proposed introducing. So obviously there's a range of different locking mechanisms you'll find on pavements or on the street around solo motorcycle bays in a number of different boroughs in London, and what your take is on the how much of an impact they have on reducing motorcycle theft based on your conversations with the motorcycling community?
There is enough pavement furniture for people to lock up their motorcycles that currently exists. You'd be better spending your time actively encouraging motorcyclists to use it properly, in the way that the police policy of layered security, chain, disc lock, cover over the top of it, trackers and alarms. People do that stuff, their motorbikes don't get nicked. The reason people's motorbikes get nicked is because they're careless and they don't take the time to lock them up properly. But putting them in areas where there's cameras isn't going to stop people getting their motorbikes stolen. The thieves that steal these bikes, particularly the small bikes, are stealing them because they're low-hanging fruit. That's what happens.
Okay, so therefore, would it be fair to say that you think that the installation of furniture alongside solo motorcycle bays to theoretically make it easier for people to lock up their bikes more securely is not something that you think would be helpful? Or
no, that's not what I said. Most of the solo motorcycle parking bays that I'm aware of have got something to lock up to, and that works really well. Okay. I just don't see that you need any more. And also, if you're able to use residence parking and shared bays, they're between lampposts, trees, rails, whatever exists. There's usually somewhere that you can find to lock the rear wheel of your bike. There's also something else that hasn't been mentioned here. You're going to end up with bikes parked on all kinds of bits of pavement, corners of land, all kinds of places, people trying to avoid using parking permits. There's going to be bikes all over the place that you don't want them, and you're completely not aware of that. And I can see it coming. I know exactly what it's going to look like.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you for your comments and your questions. And I don't know, Michael, Gosika, have any closing remarks in terms of what George has mentioned?
It's just really to thank you, George, for your feedback. It's invaluable to get experience from you who've lived and worked in Hackney for so long and can advise on what is the right things that we should be thinking about and looking at. And also thank you to all the other participants as well that have contributed towards this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gosika. Michael, do you have any closing remarks?
I'd just like to echo what Gosika said. I'd like to thank everyone for taking part. I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and whilst I recognise there's obviously a wide range of views around this, I think that having these sort of conversations only helps everyone to understand each other's different positions and some of the challenges around the proposals that we've got set out, which I think will be invaluable in the long run. So thank you all very much for taking the time to join us today and take part in the conversation.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Please, if you have 5 minutes after the session ends to fill out the survey, we just put it in the chat. We put the link on the chat. This will help us to understand if this session was good and helpful to you. And again, we have the consultation ending on Monday. So if you haven't had the chance to, please go on the consultation website and fill out the consultation. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. And thank you again for joining us.